The ongoing tussle over who should receive the value-added tax is far from being over. According to a report, the Nigerian federal government, the Federal Capital Territory, and about 34 states may face revenue drop to the tune of over 3.9 trillion if governments of Rivers and Lagos states begin the collection of the value-added tax in their respective states. Remember that Justice Stephen Palm of the Federal High Court in Port Harcourt, the Rivers State capital, had on August 10, 2021, ruled that Rivers State and not the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FRS, should be collecting the VAT and personal income tax in the state. While just on Friday, the Lagos State Governor, Babajide Sanwo-Olu, signed the VAT bill into law just few days after the State House of Assembly passed the bill. The controversy rages on in the land. How long will this last? Who blinks first? The federal agency or the state government? What are the implications for the economy of Nigeria? Will other states not in support of the move by Lagos and Rivers, like Kogi State, bow to the dictates of true federalism? Joining us in discussing this is Sam Aiboni, an international law expert and member of the Society of Corporate Governance in Nigeria. He's also a member of the Nigerian Bar Association, MBA, section on business law, member Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and International Bar Association, IBA. Good to have you on the show, Mr. Aiboni.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
Good morning. VAT is still in the news. I mean, you will imagine you would have thought that maybe, it will be piece of the graveyard after the curious, ruling that, status quo ante should be maintained. But everybody is still talking about, who collects VAT, who blinks first, etc. What are we likely to witness, in your own view, in the next few weeks, given the fact that Lagos State, for example, is saying this so-called order to maintain status quo wouldn't apply to me because I was not joined in the first instance, in the law, and therefore I could possibly proceed. We haven't heard directly from the governor. Governor Wike of Rivers hasn't said anything, but then everybody's still talking about VAT. What is going on?
Well, tax has always been a very interesting issue, and I think it goes to the root of our democracy because it's the basis for the social contract theory. As citizens, you pay tax and you demand accountability for government. So you can understand the passion of the issue about tax. Now, if we step back a little, VAT, as we have it today, is one of the creations of legacies from the military regime. Yes, and we need to give credit because at the time, we know that tax administration in Nigeria has always been difficult. If we go back all to the way to the Abba women's riot, it has always been about tax. So tax is always a very emotive topic. So at the time, apart from people that had statutory deductions like payee, nobody really had paid tax. And government, in a bid to increase revenue, introduced VAT and withholding tax. And it was an attempt to collect tax at the source. Now, in the military regime, it's understandable. We have a military, federal, unitary administration, and they can administer tax nationally. Now, I think one of the gaps in transition from military to civilian, this is one of the things that fell through the crack. And for me, in this in this day of restructuring, I give a lot of credit to the Rivers State government for having the courage to test it out in the judiciary. Now, it's just because it's Rivers State government. There have been a lot of times where these courts have pronounced that the federal government lacks the constitutional basis to administer VAT and consumption tax. And I think even if you look at the arguments of the FRSC and the Federal Association, they never say that they have the constitutional basis to collect tax. All they say is that the National Assembly, in creating FRS, gave them the broad rules to administer the tax. So I don't think from a legal perspective, there's really an issue of whether federal government can collect consumption tax. It's really, the argument has always been about the administration of the tax. And you can understand the complexity because like most of my clients now are in a frenzy because they run businesses across state lines.
Across states.
And we have spent a lot of time working on to say, if states start taking VAT, how do we manage those situations to avoid multiple tax? So it's not a peace in the land if state governments start collecting VAT and everything. There are other issues that will come up, but that's life. And I think that's why lawyers and specialized in tax space will continue to have employment. So, like I said, I think it's not going to go away with the judiciary. But coming back to the specific issues around the status quo and the judiciary, for me, I'm very critical about the judiciary. But I also want to say that really we have gotten where we are with multiple orders, whether it's tax, whether it's in the political space, whether it's the corporate space. But that's what we have learned to live with.
Yes.
It is a tricky one. You've talked about the complexities there. I mean, VAT is a different sort of tax because it is paid by the consumer firstly, but you don't really see where that money goes. It's not something that you can claim back or claim off of your expenditure in a year. It's a hidden cost almost. But it does have a lot of significance, as you've said, because with the way Nigeria is organized, that money's as it stands, would go to the federal government and then it trickles back down into state governments. You have a situation where you've got states like Lagos and rivers that generate a lot of VAT, and then you've got other states that barely generate anything. So if this were to trigger a whole change in the way that states would now be the sole collectors of this tax, how would it work for other states that don't have internally generated revenue and rely heavily on VAT contributions?
Well, I think your question is really the Rivers State's governor's argument, because he says that he doesn't imagine that Rivers State is generating so much revenue, and because let's go back to the question: what is fair? Fair from perspective would be that we collect so much from VAT, and we are one nation, and we should distribute it across the tiers. And FRS would say fairness means that federal government just gets 15%, states get, and local governments get. But if you translate it to, Lagos and Rivers State that are generating most of this VAT, and at the end of the day, states that are not generating VAT are getting a huge chunk of it, that isn't fair. So really, the issue of fairness is from where perspective you're sitting on. And I think this brings to fore the question on restructuring and resource control, because at the end of the day, yes, we all agree that when we play football, that we are one Nigeria. We all agree on that. But when it comes to money, the running joke is that when you at home you eat food, it's not the same when it comes to the meat. So we are all Nigerians when it's football and this, but when it comes to revenue allocation, revenue sharing, then everybody says, okay, I think I should be getting a bigger piece of the pie. So I think that these controversies like this, and we're getting the courts involved to make a decision, I think it's a good thing, because it tests our constitutionality, and let us really test what the law and the judges are. In jurisprudence, you like to say, where is the law? Is it the National Assembly? Is it the courts? So I think the courts have an opportunity. The Court of Appeal, Supreme Court ultimately really has an opportunity to define what fairness it is for us and what the laws are for us. And I should commend the state governors, Lagos and Rivers, taking the lead and not going through self-help to get the courts to make an interpretation on the matter.
Yeah, but I'm interested in why the states, seem to assume the powers of the local government. Because the money, even VAT, tax, everything, it is not, let's assume that, yes, you succeed in saying states should collect the taxes. You mentioned the point of law. Who says that the local governments can't challenge, that such a decision if we are to go by the true letter of what is fair and true fiscal federalism? 15%, as you said, goes to federal government. 50% is shared among the states, and 35% goes to, local government. If Lagos and Rivers states succeed because they control more than 70% of the chunk that comes, from VAT, are they winning just for the states? Are the local governments not supposed to have a say in what is going on as regards, VAT in the eye of the law? Well,
I think a very interesting question, and I think even the president shares the same opinion that
Exactly.
Local government administrations are not as I'm trying to be politically correct. Because even the president, when he was on, when you guys interviewed him, like he talked about the failure of the local government system, and it's really hot because that is where development should happen.
Absolutely.
Yes, and I always like to go into solution mode. I think for local governments, I think we shouldn't blame the state governors or the presidency for the failure of local governments. I think the quality of representation at the local government and the interest and participation in local government elections, that's really where the problem. Because what are the quality of people that are interested in local government? And until you get people interested in local administration at that stage. So I think it's all about participation. Okay. So I think we need to attract a lot more people into that level. That's when we'll get to see a difference. Because what I expect now is that the local government associations and the leaders of the local government should come together and also make approach the cost after the state government as well. It doesn't just stop. It doesn't stop at Wike. What of local government? What of? So I think it's time for the local governments to actually step up the plate and say, okay, well, we also have a stake in this pie too. And where are we on this? How do we get share?
Okay, all right, Mr. Aiboni, we will return to, the thoughts that, that is flowing very well, from your good self. But we will go on a short break now. And of course, when we return, we'll continue with the discussion. Do stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. In a press conference held by Nigeria's Federal Inland Revenue Service on the ongoing value-added tax collection disagreement between the federal government of Nigeria and Rivers State, Matthew Bojubola, I think that's right, who is the group lead on special tax operation at the group, said that the input-output mechanism of VAT won't allow state collection to be technically possible. Let's take a listen.
It works only at a national level. VAT cannot work at subnational level. And there is no country in the world where VAT works at subnational level. And the reason is because VAT depends on the input-output mechanism. And just to illustrate this, for example, assuming a business person bought an item, let's say in Osun State, and paid VAT, and takes the goods to, let's say, Sokoto State to sell. Remember, this business person had paid VAT when purchasing the product in Osun State. And when selling in Sokoto State, it will charge VAT. And by the operation of the input-output mechanism, this business person will deduct the input tax paid in Osun State from the output tax charged in Sokoto State and remit any difference to the relevant tax authority. In this case, because there is a single tax authority handling VAT, it is the same authority that received the VAT in Osun State that will receive the additional VAT payable in Sokoto State. And so it is easy to work out the input-output mechanism, and there is no issue of the business person being shortchanged. There is no issue of consumers having to pay VAT more than once.
Meanwhile, a federal high court sitting in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, dismissed the suit by the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FRS, seeking to stop the Rivers State government from commencing collection of value-added tax, VAT.
Penalty executed by the FRS against the Rivers State government was ill-advised and highly provocative. However, being a government that believes in the rule of law, we decided on our own to suspend the enforcement of the Rivers State VAT Law 2021 pending the outcome of the FIRS application for stay of execution before the Federal High Court. Today, the Federal Inland Revenue Service has failed in its attempt to frustrate the enforcement of the state law on VAT with the Federal High Court's dismissal of its application for self-execution of the judgment. It is important to reiterate that there is no wrong in exercising our legal rights and unconstitutional democracy to stop the continuing breach, denial, and curtailment of constitutional right of states to lawfully impose and collect value-added and other related taxes within jurisdiction to the exclusion of the federal government. And in doing so, our singular and progressive objective was to contribute to the advancement of fiscal federalism by enabling the federating states to explore and exploit their potential and capacity for generating greater internal revenues with which to fund their development goals and reduce the outdated over-reliance on pitiable federal allocation and other handouts. Naturally, some states with presently low economic activities and ethically restrictive social policies with economic implications may be adversely affected for now. But this is not our own. Like the right to derivation, this is also a constitutional prescription, which us well as the political leaders to respect and defend as the supreme law of the land.
Joined by Mr. Sam Aiboni, an international law expert and member of the Society of Corporate Governance in Nigeria, to discuss the VAT issue with us at the studio. So, Mr. Aiboni, thanks for staying through. You've listened to what the FRS spokesperson has said, and then what the response from Governor Wike. All this to me looks like law and legality, but then nothing is clear as at now. It has gone to appeal court. Maybe this will end up at the Supreme Court. Who knows? From what the FRS is saying, maybe they will approach the National Assembly, to say, put this strictly, as they have done actually, on exclusive list. Where are we headed? What is likely to take shape in all this if the states, Rivers and Lagos in particular, insist that they have to proceed to collect their VAT?
Well, I think it's an interesting time for legal scholars in Nigeria, because I think this is going to push the envelope in defining our jurisprudence. And this is one of the few issues that cuts across judiciary, legislature, and the executive in taxes. Now, the Constitution is what it is. The National Assembly also has extensive powers to make laws. So now this borders on the National Assembly has made a law that is inconsistent with the Constitution. What do we do? And the executive is saying that in managing and administering tax, that it will be anarchy if we allow all the states to collect tax. So the only thing we did was to get the National Assembly to get FIRS, and that was the only way to manage tax. So I think this is a classic constitutional, I think it's a lawyer's, yes, this is the reason why we all practice the profession. So from any perspective you are looking at it from, if you are looking at it from the executive has the role for the higher good. The executive has to, the revenue stream has to continue. It has to be most efficient, because at the end of it, at the back of it is that is the taxpayers. It's going to be like what you alluded to, double taxation if the tax regime is not efficient. If it's not efficient, they're not going to get everything into the basket. So you can understand where federal government and federal revenue is coming from. Now, looking at it from the Wike's and the state government's perspective, the Constitution is clear. You are federal government, you are not Big Daddy. You can't do everything. This is wrong. And they have approached the courts, and the courts have made pronouncements. Now, the National Assembly are also being asked to look at the Constitution, because that is where this whole thing is coming from. Can we amend the Constitution to reflect the aims of the executive? Now, pending when you amend the Constitution, what happens? Can the federal government continue to take tax at the revenue? So I think at the end of the day, my own perspective is the definition of what is law and what is the source of law. and maybe selfishly, I've always said that what the judges say is law. So we have an opportunity now for the judiciary to create the law in this space and put it to rest. So I'm happy that the state governments are approaching the courts for us to get clarity and interpretation on what the state is law. And until the executive can get the National Assembly to change the constitution, then whatever the judges say as interpretation of the law will be the interpretation of the law. Because from all the arguments, even the federal government doesn't say that they have the constitutional right to levy withholding tax. What they are saying is that, it will be anarchy if all the states administer it. It's not fairness if it resides where it is. So really, so it's
because do they have? Do they have a point with that? It seemed to make some form of logical sense that it will create some sort of taxation, anarchy if all of these different governments, have to start dibble-dabbling in it. So do you think, first of all, it's even possible for there to be a successful tax system where state governments take the lead?
At this point.
Well,
at this point.
I think I alluded to it initially. Like I said, a few of my clients are getting concerned on the implications of state governments taking tax. Now, a few of my clients run businesses across state lines. So the question is, for us, has always been easy. We just do federal revenue at the federal and show the taxes and we're good. But now, who are you going to tax?
Yeah.
So entities like the breweries, fast food manufacturers that are selling products at one place, manufacturing in another place. Is it where you manufacture you're going to pay? Is it where you sell? Is it at the point of sale? Is it at the point of manufacture? So there's going to be a whole lot of issues. And the guys have already talked about this whole idea about input VAT and output VAT and the net off. Now, in practical terms, in Nigeria, everything that goes into government conference, I've not seen anybody that successfully gotten anything out anyway. So that argument is neither here nor there. But because of that argument, is that why you should continue to administer tax that you do not have the constitutional powers to administer? And I think that's the questions that before the courts. I wouldn't want to be presumptuous to to give an answer.
But the interesting thing in all this is that the federal government is not even the biggest beneficiary. It's only 15% that it gets as a cut, from this. FRS takes 4%, collection cost, which of course you can argue, how can you take 4% of 1.3 trillion that was collected last? That could run, of course, into billions, but that's not even the issue. The issue to me now is, this is not necessarily about the state struggling with funding with the federal government, nor is it about the state or the southern states versus the northern states. For me, this is about maybe at best 6 rich and wealthy states insisting that let us control our resources as far as VAT is concerned. But then there are 30 other states, all of them with governors belonging to the Governors Forum, whose states might suffer if they succeed. Yes, on the one hand, we will win in terms of the law, but in terms of the citizens of 30 states, that are still struggling anyway, struggling to pay, salaries, struggling to pay pensions, etc. How can we define fairness, equity, and justice just on the basis of those who are blessed, sort of looking like we don't care what happens to the other 30 states? What if the northern states say, for example, we exempted food items from VAT, and we supply the bulk of what the Southeast? Let us return and say, okay, let's return to sales tax. Yeah. For example, what about the derivation that goes to the South states that control, the huge chunk of the oil and gas, and they say, okay, the 20% or 30% derivation is no longer, satisfactory for us if you can, accede to the demands of the state. Won't all this lead to unintended consequences?
Well, I think these unintended consequences of the discussion is really the beauty of the argument, because I think these are the discussions. We'll not be able to have a national conference. We'll not be able to have those discussions. So if we're going to have these discussions...
We had one in 2014.
Yes, but we've not had one since then. But what I'm saying, if we're not able to have the discussions in context of politics, government, and budget, let's have the discussion in context of resources. So for me, I think it's an important discussion that we need to have. And the argument is there for everybody because we have the market in Aba. Yes. We have the pyramids and the solid minerals in the north.
Yeah.
We have the cattle. So for me, every state has the potential to generate VAT. So if maybe this state of affairs we have that 6 states are generating most of the VAT,
yes.
that is what has caused that we're not producing dairy internationally, and we're not producing cotton as much as we used to do. So if the discussion on saying that consumption tax should be retained by the states, then every state governor and commissioner of finance will have to look inwards to see how it's going to generate consumption tax instead of waiting to get a piece of what was shared by FIRS. So for me, I think there's some fundamental questions that needs to be asked. What is fairness? Is fairness getting 6 states to share their revenue with the 36 states, or is fairness making all the other 36 states compete? Because at the end of the day, it's competition that goes.
Some states are not going to be as viable as others anyway, no matter how they try.
Well, for me, the way I put it is that the future for Nigeria is digital economy.
Yes.
You understand? Digital literacy. And there's no state in Nigeria that cannot have a broadband network and an intellectual hub and attract a Silicon Valley. So there are potentials there. So once you see that you can't get VAT because you're not selling food, then maybe you open up your space, do the tax regime to attract people to invest there. So we are going into a knowledge-based economy. So let's forget about all the resource-based, because at the end of the day, we're going from oil to renewable. So we need to start preparing to be competitive in that space.
Yeah.
So for me, there's really no state that has a disadvantage in the digital economy going forward, and that's really where the future is. So for me, let's everybody go back and see how it's going to generate a consumption tax, and I think that's what it's done for my own definition of fairness. That was my own definition of fairness, to say everybody should consume, should generate consumption tax and on its own, because you can't rely on a few states providing consumption tax for the rest of the people. That doesn't sound fair.
I mean, talking about not sounding fair, I think that's dominated the topic of conversation. What is fair? What is not unfair? But if we cast our minds back to Kano back in 2013, I think it was. I want to talk about beer taxes and the monies brought about on that. There was
forbidden products.
Yes. Because as it stands, if we use that example, we know that the consumption of alcohol in parts of this country is outlawed, especially if you subscribe to Sharia law. But Kano, for example, has in the past received the proceeds from taxes on the consumption of alcohol. So when you talk about arguments over fairness, how would that work? Do you think that states would...
They already
do. But, how would that work, for example? Because if we're now talking about states taking a bit more responsibility, where does that line start and end? If we use alcohol as an example, most especially in northern states, how do you think that would work?
You share from the money of a product that you do not want.
Exactly.
Not only don't you want it, you destroy it when it comes to your state.
So for me, that's the whole idea of why the states should be allowed to administer and control VAT. If you are consuming alcohol in Lagos and you're paying VAT on it, then there's no basis for you to now share alcohol-based VAT with a state that destroys alcohol. Yes, and so for me, that is even further pushes the argument of fairness. So everybody should. So if you're in Kano and you want to increase your revenue in terms of conversion, then create a regional hub for whatever and generate a VAT for me. I think that's what fairness will mean. Not that you say, well, we want a piece of the share, and at the end of the day, you are destroying products that are forbidden, and you're collecting the money. So the product is not good enough for you, but the money is somehow useful.
But then the principle of true federalism, I mean, federalism isn't just about money and what accrues to you and what to share. Federalism is about the fact that if we have agreed to come together, let's also try as much as possible to look after each other. What I have not heard from the states agitating for total control is what percentage will you cede to the federal government to distribute to other states? if it is possible. I mean, this is what we get in America, because if you're using examples of successful federations, you will get that from the United States, maybe to an extent, in Brazil, where federating states, contribute to the pool. You control substantially what you produce and what you generate, but then you also have to, contribute to what goes to the federal. Your defense is centrally, manned, police to an extent in the case of Nigeria. But the states that are agitating for this are not saying, they're just basically saying, oh, there's a whole lot that we need to do with our money. Are there other considerations that the governors of Rivers, of Lagos, maybe 4 or 5 other states should need to engage with, so that it does not look like, oh, I mean, what happens in Kogi, I don't care. What happens in Nasarawa, I don't care,
not my concern.
because I supply 70% of the VAT.
I hear you, and I think for me, legal issues are a lot easier to deal with because they are straightforward. So, like we said when we did the assessment, was that the constitution is clear. Even the FRS is not saying they have the constitutional basis. Now, we are going back to the question of fairness now. But I think, we all admit that there's a gap in the legislation on tax, and the gap was created because the legislation was created in '93 in a federal regime, and when we switched to democracy and in 1999, I don't think the legislation was thought through. At the time, what they did was to create FIRS and give it the powers to do what it does. But today, the state governors have woken up and said there's a gap. So I think there is a need for the guys, because at the end of the day, everybody has to sit down to look at that tax administration process and see how it's going to be administered. But in pushing the envelope, it really does, the federal government needs a piece of consumption tax we collected with this. That's another question that needs to be, but I can say yes, some people can say no, but I think that's the issue on the administration of the state administration of VAT.
Yeah.
There are some questions that need to be answered. Okay. There's also the question on the local government, like you have pointed out.
Absolutely.
So that once the state governments comes up with their own legislation, then there's going to be another set of litigation and challenging those legislations that they are making.
Okay. All right, Mr. Aiboni, we want to thank you very much for coming to the studios to discuss the VAT issue with us. Thank you so much. It's been very enlightening. All right, thank you.